Hello, you guys. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Outside the Box. I have a very, very interesting show today that I'm really excited about doing because I like to, as you know, encourage people to think and see God outside of their boxes. And it's one of these, the topic that we're talking about today is one of those things that I think is very, very needed, especially in the Black community. And it kind of extends into other areas. But before I go into that, again, my name is Sage the Coach. I am a certified life and relationship coach. And my show Outside the Box is to show people or encourage people to see that God is bigger than our boxes. My show usually airs on Saturdays at 12 p.m. But if you follow me, like me, share me on Facebook, you can also see different things throughout the week on my page, sometimes some replays on my page, or some special episodes on my Facebook page. Also, if you are following me on the Speakeasy page or my personal Facebook page, this might be worth it for you to follow me on my Outside the Box page so you can get all the extra goodies that I do throughout the week. And so, yeah, so please make sure you like, share, and follow me, and we'll get into the topic that we have for today. And so today I have a special guest. He is an author and a coach as well. And we're going to be talking about the importance of fathers in the home. Again, this is a very, very crucial topic. I am a Christian, but I am also a Black Christian. So I'm very aware of the issues that affect the Black community. And I do like to bring those up also within my show's context. So before we get into the nitty gritty and the good stuff about the topic and the book that we have today, because we're going to be actually talking about a lot about a book that my guest wrote, I will go ahead and bring out my guest. His name is Mike Lynk, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I'll go ahead and bring him out now. So here we go. Hello, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm fine. I want to thank you again for doing this, for even reaching out to me, because again, I have a lot of people who request to be on my show. And, you know, a lot of them have the same kind of topic sometimes. And you get, you know, some stuff that you might not necessarily want to do, just to be honest, but you were the only one that came to me with this topic. And as soon as I saw it, I'm like, absolutely, yes, I want to do it. And I think it's very, very important topic. And so before we get into the importance of fathers in the home, based on the book that you wrote, and let me see, the name of the book, I don't have a physical copy of the book or I would show it now, but I bought a digital copy, so I don't have the physical copy. I don't know if you guys can kind of see it there on my phone.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, so it's EFF Father's Day, and Mike wrote this book about overcoming his struggles with his father not being in the home with him as he was growing up. But before we get into that, Mike, can you tell the people a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and anything else you want to share?
Yes, sure. Definitely. I am now currently a first-time author, in which you guys saw the book. The title is actually F Father's Day. It's kind of an acronym, you know, and I can explain what that is all about as we, you know, get into the interview. Outside of that, my background is in communications and media as well. But outside of those things, I go into schools. I do a lot of speaking engagements. I do mentoring when it comes to like young boys and adult men. I'm actually a coordinator of a ministry at my church, which this is Men of Purpose. So I do a lot of male development type of work with young boys and males, you know, while I'm continuing to grow myself.
Okay,
So
right.
In a nutshell, that's me in a short summary. I do a lot, but that's the gist of what's most key about who I am.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that. And you say you would the acronym F because I said EFF. What does that mean? What does that stand for? Because I was even wondering what it meant as I was reading the book.
Well, in the brainstorming of the book, I started to think about overall what are the emotions that people like myself who grew up without a father like go through. And it brought me to a concept of the letter F and the different words that come from that have to deal with emotions. Um, F, Father's Day, just how it sounds, for those people who have, experienced that type of emotion. I believe at some point for us who grew up in single parent homes and our fathers weren't around, we sort of had that type of thought process, where it's basically like, in other words, I don't curse. So, but at the particular time, using that profane language, it crossed my mind before.
Mm.
And even though it says F Father's Day, it's kind of like a play on words, but and the holiday. But being a father is 365 days a year.
Mm.
It takes every single day for a man to be a father. So it's just not about that particular holiday, but it's
Mm.
about being a father as a whole. And F in general is you go through frustration, which is an F. You go through some different elements of fear. You go through some different elements of fake, meaning, some of us go through where you have a father who's kind of like double dutch, like in and
In and
out,
out.
broken
Yeah.
promises.
Mm.
And you feel like things are fake, it's not real.
Mm.
You
Mm.
get frustrated, you know,
Mm.
you want to fight, those things. So when you read the book, I break down in the beginning of the book those different F's that we as single parent children who are raised by our mothers often go through in silence, and we really don't talk about it. So I try to bring that to light.
Okay. Okay. Wow. So I mean, so the book. The book is a very short read. So if any of you guys are interested in getting this, or again, like I said in the promo, if you grew up without your father, if you're raising a child without a father, if you're a father yourself, this book is definitely something that you should read. It's a very, very quick read, but there is so much compacted within that read that I mean, I feel like it's perfect because a lot of times, as writers, you can get kind of caught up in the language and trying to make stuff sound pretty, and you become a little bit more artistic with your words. But the topic that you are talking here, it doesn't require that because it is so much, like you say, emotion, so much mental process, so much reflection involved in reading the book that I think is really, really key or good that the book is condensed because it gives people time to now reflect on what it is that they're going through and what they need to think about, and especially in their own life. So I just thought it was great that it was, the way you compacted such complex things that people go through. And so I really like the book for that reason because uh, and another reason is because of the process that you explained about, because a lot of times these things are not really discussed with men that very much. And I don't know if they're discussed like amongst men, but I know as a female, it's very difficult for you to kind of get into these deeper conversations with men about how they feel. I mean, if anything, like you said, they will express anger and things like that. But to really go into how you feel and the process of working through it and how it affected you and things like that, it really gave me a lot of insight into men when it comes to these type of things. And I also, of course, these things affect women too, that grow up without their fathers, but I'm sure it's in a different way, but it's still the same issue. But I just really like the depth. I like how vulnerable you were. I like especially the part where you gave your father the book for him to write some answers to your questions, how you put his answers to those questions in the book. And I mean, I was just going through so many emotions reading your book. I'm just like, wow, this is really really good. And so again, I suggest any of you guys, I recommend you get this book. The link for the book should be in the comments. If you don't see it, you can message me personally and I can get it to you. But it should be in the comments, and I definitely recommend for you to read it. So again, so let's start with the book. So the book basically highlights a healing process, and there's a lot of different types of healing processes, but this one is much more internal and much deeper and things like that. And so one of the things that you pinpoint, because again, let me add that the book has reflection questions for you after you read all this kind of deep heavy stuff. It has reflection questions for you to now kind of analyze yourself with these things. And so but the first thing you talk about is like recognizing that you have an issue. And so you talk about some of the things that you were going through, and sometimes not always recognizing that those things were related to your relationship with your father and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about how you came to terms to understand that you did have an issue there when it came to your dad?
I think one of the hardest parts, I think we as people in general go through is acknowledging, like out loud to yourself, like you can look yourself in the face, look at yourself in the mirror and declare that something's not right, versus suppressing it and ignoring it, and just pushing it to the side. And I often did that periodically throughout, my childhood, becoming a young adult. But it always would, cycle back around in different phases of my life. It could be something simple as just seeing another young boy with his dad, and they having fun. It's different triggers that go on through our lives that we get reminded that, hey, my father isn't here, my father isn't absent, and it's there. You try to brush the emotions off, or the what you want to say, the lack of understanding that you have. You try to suppress it. It's a lot of suppression that goes on when we know that our father isn't there to be a figure in our life. And when you ignore those things, and how did I come to it? It was just honestly like being honest with myself. Like, I know it's a problem. I know it bothers me. And I know if I don't personally address it as it relates to me, not even thinking about how it's impacting my father per se, but I know emotionally that what I know is going on inside me, it's holding me up, it's paralyzing me, it's causing me to become stagnant. You know what I mean? And I think for any male that may be watching this or get to watch it later, when we become adults and we start going through things that you got to make a decision as a man, we start to think about why my father wasn't around. Like, I literally went through an emotional period one time, was like, man, my dad wasn't there. I'm in this situation. I know he should have this answer. Why weren't you there to teach me this? And there's just things, my mom, I give her kudos. And I oftentimes see, especially in this social media world, where there's just some things as it relates to a man that a woman just cannot replace, that a father is meant to instill in his child. And they can spill this. I've been two parents into that, but I even see it now with how I am as a father figure to my niece. And there's things that I know that she needs that her mother can't teach her. And I know that her mother can't teach her because of her mother's situation and her health, and but she looks at me as, it's like I'm a man. And there's just something, and I could never replace what my sister as a mother would provide for her. And it goes the same way with boys and their fathers as well, and even daughters as well, that what daughters need from their fathers as well, that the mother just can't do. And I knew that I was missing it. I knew that there was something going on in here psychologically when it comes to making decisions, how to deal with emotions, how to manage certain things that a man handles in a manner that will be, successful. That I understood that I didn't have.
Wow. Wow. That's so much in that answer. So, like, one thing that you are saying, and which I think is very, very important, well, it's a few things. So I'm going to try to keep it short and not go too much in, is that number one, I don't think women realize this very, very much. And I'll say that from my own personal experience. I didn't realize the impact that the relationship and the need that a boy has to his father until my husband told me. Like you, as a woman, and again, I'm not speaking for all women. You know that kids need love and they need nurturing, but you're basically looking at it from your perspective of what you need and what you get from it. But you don't fully appreciate or understand what a man actually offers to a kid because you're not a man and you don't have that need. You don't see the world through those glasses. And so it really took for my husband, and that's not to say I would say, oh, a boy doesn't need his dad. Of course, kids need their parents. But as far as the details about what that means, I didn't know until my husband told me. And then when he told me, it made me more sensitive to, my own son and what he needs and things like that, because I didn't know. And I think a lot of the times, especially when we talk about so many single parent homes in the Black community, and a lot of them are led by women, a lot of these women don't understand what their sons, even like you said, their daughters are missing from their dad. A woman cannot replace that. A man cannot replace a mother. God gave us two parents for a reason, and his design is for the growth and maturity of us as people. And so when you take anything from that equation, there the lack begins, and there the domino effect starts, where certain things, like you said, that you needed to be taught and understand from a male's point of view, a woman's point of view, or things like that, you don't have it. And it starts to affect you as you get older in ways that you didn't even realize. And so I really want to urge any women watching this to really, really pay attention, because it's very, very easy for us to take the role of the other parent for granted sometimes, and not even for granted, but just not really understanding what they bring to the table. And again, me learning this from my husband, it really stood out to me. And I know if I never had that conversation with my husband, some of the things that he told me about, I would have never known. I would have just been ignorant of, like, oh, okay, And then so even a lot of times he points out the problems that he sees in men in the Black community now comes from not having a father figure in the home to kind of teach you. And we don't understand those things a lot of the times as women. And we definitely need a male's input when it comes to understanding those things on a deeper level. So that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight.
I think also,
Go ahead.
is key when a mother who's raising, whether it's a young lady, or has a son, if she didn't grow up with her father in her life, some women, honestly, they don't know that they don't know
exactly
what they're hindering their child from.
Exactly.
And to a fault, to some degree, there does need to be a level of grace, but it do need to be situations like this where having conversations like this, where mothers do understand that their child's father may not be around, but they do need to get them in front of some productive, healthy males, so that their sons and their daughters can absorb some of those teachings that a father would normally do if he was in the household 24/7.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And so I'm married now, but I was a single parent before I got married for a brief period. And I did have a son, and his father was not necessarily in his life. And so I totally understand what you're saying. And even then, I really tried my best to, go to church, get him in front of male role models and things like that. You do have to be careful, because there are a lot of people out there that prey on kids. But I totally agree with you. And yeah, that's very, very important. And so as a kid for yourself, now you talked about not being able to make decisions and things like that. struggling to make some certain decisions. Can you talk about, because like a lot of the times you see these angry young men, and you talk about being angry, and a lot of times even fear will surface as anger. Can you just talk to some of the parents here of kids that don't have a father there, some of the signs that they should be looking for I'm sorry, in their child that might relate to their father not being there?
Um, if I had to use myself or just observation of kids, oftentimes we might do things where when authority comes around, when correction is being put in place, uh, we have a tendency to not what's a good word? Not to get in line when the instruction is given by whether it's by a woman or a man. We often will not necessarily listen to instruction like off the rip, off gate, simply because there's a level of discipline or structure that I believe a father brings that can sort of, in many cases, get a child in line quicker than a woman may try to do sometimes. I know, you get that, how you grow up and your parents give you like that look, you know what I'm saying? Your mama do it and your daddy do it. It's something like, even like going in schools and dealing with kids. I see there's a difference. Like, I could walk into a room and immediately, like, the kids are like, pause for a second, like, and just look, just because of my male presence. And when you think about like children and dealing with a male that promote structure, discipline, and things like that, when you see kids that are like out of control, mouthy, and things like that, those are some very alarming signs that it's a possibility that there's a father not in the home. I can remember a lot of times not listening, at the point when my father wasn't around. Right before high school, I kind of went into this phase where I wanted to like fight, but I don't know. I might be, an anomaly, because I for some odd reason, when I was like 11, I realized that me getting in trouble and acting up was affecting my mother. Like, it was like bothering her, because I used to get notes sent home. Back in the day, teachers used to send home notes, like bad little reports, and things like that. And I didn't hide my stuff. Some kids might try to hide it or throw it away, but my mom saw it, and I saw how it was impacting her. And I made a decision. I don't know what made me say it. I was like, you know what, little Mike, this is what I'm saying. Like, you got to stop, because this ain't helping. This ain't helping mom. My sister was older at the time. They were already kind of like beefing and things like that. And I just said, like, I can't keep getting in trouble. I'm about to go in high school. And I got to get my act straight. I literally said that to myself, and for whatever reason, I just tried to stay on the straight and narrow after that.
Yeah. Wow. So it really, what you're saying is very, very true. And I mean, if we go into all the spiritual things behind why this is the case, I mean, this will be turned into a week's worth of interview, but I can definitely tell that there is a difference when it comes to me saying things and my husband saying things. And, we all know from the Bible that God established a man to be the head. And in a lot of ways, he represents authority, that women are more nurturing and things like that. And so, of course, that authority and that nurturing comes together in parenting, which is what the kid needs. But when I say do something, we get the moaning, we get the feet dragging, we get the, sometimes on the back talk. But if my husband with his deep voice is like, hey, people fall in line much quicker than when I do it. So you can definitely say, and I use that to my advantage. Please believe that. So if I'm saying something and I feel like I'm repeating, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go tell your dad. Like, and I know a lot of women that do that, because you know that the kids, that male authority, like they kind of shrink it under it a little bit, which is what is needed to. I mean, we all know about sin and how we kind of have to be tamed as people, not to just chase everything we want and how we feel. And men definitely bring that component of like submission when it comes to kids. Like, no, you have to do it like this, because if you don't, people we will just do anything. And so so anyway, yeah, it's very, very true. A very powerful statement. Like, I'm gonna tell your dad. You know, you get much more response from your kids when you do that. And it to me, it's just attributes to the way that God structured the family to be. And so that's really important. um and so, you know, you have a lot of young men. I remember watching an episode, not an episode, but a service from TD Jakes, and he was kind of praying for this young boy, and the boy was so angry. And the mother brought him up there for prayer because she was talking about how angry he was all the time and stuff like that. And TD Jakes just hugged the boy and is like, I mean, he needs a dad. Like, you know, a lot of the times you might have trouble with your teens, even if it's girls or boys, and you don't realize that what they're missing is that father figure. Because even though we want to do what we want to do, we also take comfort and direction and guidance. We have that male authority figure there. And so, yeah, that's very, very important. Um, somebody, Marissa said, "True, Daddy gets attention." Yes, he does. And so yeah. So now you talked about recognizing that there was an issue stemming from, but now you were. So let's go back just a little bit so people have some context. What age were you when your dad left? Because like some people don't have their dads there at all. Some people's parents were never married. They never even met their dad. So can you talk a little bit about your circumstances, like your parents, and then at what age you were when your dad left, and kind of what your relationship was after that?
My father eventually left the home when I was around 11, 12-ish, about to turn 12, going into 8th grade, around that time. Okay. Before that, you know, he was there from birth until then.
And your parents were married?
Yeah, they were married when I was born. Yes. He got, at the time, he got my mom pregnant with my sister, and then after that, he married her. We and him had a conversation about that before he passed away, and it's in the book too, I believe. Yeah. Where he basically, he was like, I got to do right by your mom, because he had got her pregnant with my older sister, and that's when they got married. So when I came along, you know, things were a lot of my memory. Now it's a lot of it's kind of negative, a lot of the memories that I have of him, because I was real young at the time. And the good things that I do have to, you know, to live on with my dad is, before he really got into a lot of the things that caused him to be separated from the family. My dad was the first person to give me a job. You know, I used to go to work with him. I started working when I was about 9, 10 years old. And my father and my uncles, and they still do to this day, they built homes, like they built houses and things like that. And I would go to work. And those are a lot of the good memories that I had of my father. So that's around the time that my pops left the home, and immediately, probably after he left home, not too long after, me, my mom, and my sister, we ended up homeless. Shortly after.
Yeah. And so so he was in the home from the birth to 11, and then, you know, he left, and then hard times came very quickly. And then what was your relationship with him after he left? Because like some people's fathers are not in the home, but they're still in their lives. And so can you talk about like how often he was around, even though he wasn't in the home, and kind of draw some contrast between being in the home versus not being in the home versus being completely absent?
My father went completely absent, ghost. My father started indulging more in alcohol eventually into drugs. And then, of course, I found out later on in my adult life, he cheated on my mother as well. So the relationship was very, very scarce. Like I can count on my hand what my father called eventually when me, my sister, and my mom got things together. And we ended up, after being homeless, having a roof over our head. I can probably remember a few times where I heard that he called. And of course, my sister had more years with him. I think my sister might have been, let me see, my sister probably was around 16 by the time he had left the house. So their relationship was totally different from what I had. And my sister, although she was upset with him, had a better relationship with my pops. And I can remember maybe a couple of times she actually talked to him on the phone, and she would tell me that he wanted to talk to me. But by that time, I really didn't have any respect for him because, the day that we became homeless and we didn't have a roof over our head and he was nowhere to be found, like I literally lost all respect for him because I was like, yo, like, where's dad? Like, why we don't have a house anymore? How could you like leave us? You're a man. I've heard over and over growing up, a man is supposed to provide and do this and that. Like, I'm homeless. Like people saw me, people saw that I got kicked out. That was a tough time for me.
Yeah. You talked about it in the book, and actually it's what opens the book.
I started to get a little emotional right now thinking about it,
Yeah.
So it was rough.
As soon as you open with this in the book, and I was glued from the beginning. I was like, wow. And it just kind of drew me into the rest of the story. And again, made it a quick read because I just kind of couldn't stop reading it. So I kind of can, understand what you're saying based on what you wrote in the book and things like that. And I can totally imagine that was a very, very difficult time for any kid. First of all, your dad's not there, and then you're homeless. And it's just like, you talked about processing, like a lot of this stuff we have to process and kind of draw meaning from. And that is very, very overwhelming for a kid to try to understand all of these very, very big and traumatic things going on in their life at the time. So I can totally imagine you just going through that and saying, you're done with him. Like, you don't want to have anything to do with him or whatever. And so what I wanted to ask you about, so you talk about in the book, you became a Christian, you were kind of having some tough times throughout your childhood, kind of went through some things. And then as you got older, you got in tune with some, it was a specific guy who kind of led you back to Christ or led you to Christ. And so how do you think that your relationship with God kind of played into your decision to recognize that there was a deeper issue? I mean, do you think you would have been able to do that if you were not a Christian? Because of course you can still do that even if you're not. But I'm just curious as to how your relationship with God played into you kind of recognizing that there was an issue there that needed to be addressed.
Even if you didn't put a label on it, like quote unquote, be a Christian, in general, my family has always been centered around God. And even though I've had my times where I strayed away from church, being young, going to college, having fun and things like that, he's always been rooted in me. And you mentioned how I ended up back in church. The young man that I speak of in the book, which is my fraternity brother, now, he was, he's a youth pastor and at the time. And just because we were around the same age demographic and just noticing him being a young man, it kind of like brought the light back. Like, hey, Mike, you love God and things like that. And I would say whether I probably went back to church or not, you know what? Honestly, I got to give credit to God. Like, to be honest with you, Had I not got back into church and built my own relationship, and built up my own spiritual growth, I don't know if me and my father would have eventually reconciled.
Mm,
And for me, I'll just reinforce this again. I knew there was a problem with me.
mm,
I knew there was some emotional things going on with me, and I knew that my spirit wasn't um, at its best, or
mm,
it wasn't in a line. Something was off. So I just built my relationship stronger with God. And eventually, I went through this 2-year process that had a therapy component to it. And it centered me. It brought me back to a lot of reflection, and overall just looking at my life, and had me analyzing the man that my father was, just like God does. So,
mm, mm,
and eventually, it got me to a point where I was able to address the situation with a level head,
mm,
and some understanding, because God gave me some balance in that,
mm. That's good.
which opened my heart, which allowed me to let a lot of things go, and to make an attempt to fix my relationship with my pops.
Mm.
Mm.
Well,
With
something
something
that
that
you
you
said that
said
stands
that
out to me. Well, a few
was
things,
a
but
few
one
things,
is
but
like
one is like
God does
God
always
does
prepare
always.
us. Like some of these things are very, very difficult for us to deal with. God, I believe He understands that. Of course, He does. And that there sometimes is some preparation that needs to happen before we're even ready to kind of address the issue. And so I think that's a important thing to say. Another thing is when you're talking about you knew that something wasn't right. What stands out to me about that, and even in my own situation, my father was there, but my parents divorced, and he was still in the picture, but it was a broken home situation, and had some issues that come out of that. What I noticed when it came to me is a lack of peace, and so like when you talk about knowing that something wasn't right and things like that, it's almost like a lack of peace and a restlessness within yourself. And of course, those things affect your perspective, it affects your decision and things like that. But that lack of peace and turmoil within yourself. And so if anybody is having those type of issues within yourself, it's usually a sign of a deeper issue. Like for some people, it may be a daddy issue or mother issue or abandonment issue or whatever, things like that. But those are some key signs that there's some deeper things that kind of need to be dealt with, but also that there might be some preparation needed for you before you deal with them. Because again, and you talk about this in the book, like you don't have all these answers. And so you kind of create this story around why you feel the way you feel or why you think the way you think or to justify, whatever you're doing. And so that's not something that you can just dive into and dismantle very quickly. It takes time, it takes processing. Like you said, your heart has to be prepared, your mind has to be prepared to kind of tackle some of those things, or else they can easily just look really, really big and overwhelming to the point where you feel like you don't want to deal with them and you keep kind of turning away from them because you feel like it's too much to deal with. So I wanted to kind of point that out. One thing that I did want to ask you is how do you think that, your relationship or your perception of your dad affected or helped your understanding of God? Because a lot of people have bad relationships with their fathers, even if they are in the home, and then it affects their perception of God. They kind of feel like God is like their dad, and some things like that. And we all know that God is the ultimate father. And so, do you think that your relationship with your dad kind of altered your perception of God in any way, or helped it in any way? I know you said you kind of have Christian roots outside of that, so maybe it wasn't a big issue. But I'm just curious as to your experience.
No, I don't think the perception of my father and my relationship with God altered anything on how I guess, pictured my father.
Mm-hmm.
I think it brought more of a enlightening perspective on how I should look at my father, how I should basically, and I talk about this in the book, where I had to separate the man from my father's issues. You know
Mm.
what I'm saying?
Mm.
And what I mean by that is God, when my father came into this world, just like any of us, my God didn't birth my father, and he came out his mother's womb, and God didn't say you're an alcoholic and you're going to be a drug addict. You know, he didn't. He wasn't birthed to be that person.
Mm.
So once I was able to put my father over here and then look at the substance abuse that basically took his life in a different direction,
Mm.
I was able to be more upset with these things over here simply because they're things, they
Mm.
can, they can be removed, they can be, they can evaporate.
Mm.
Those are things that I never indulged um, in my life, to the point where it took me down a bad pathway. So I was able to say, hey, these are the things that caused him to go in this direction. But when I look at him now, it's like God created you just like me. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. You have the ability to change. You have the ability to turn your life around, which he did. He eventually got himself together as well. It's not in the book, but there is a point where he answered a particular question, where my sister addressed him, and it made him stop taking drugs.
Mm.
Um, and he from that point he started to like clean his life up.
Mm.
And eventually, in my own journey and path, my eyes began to open and look at him in a different manner, where I saw my dad change over time. And as I grew and healed, that allowed some space for us to try to, like, just talk, just
Mm.
have conversation, just, hey,
Mm.
Mike, how you doing? I mean, meaning me, him talking to me.
Mm.
And God just led me in a way where the reason I wrote my questions in this journal was because I felt it was less confrontational. It was a good approach to the 2-year process in therapy that I went through, in my own healing, that I learned that writing things down was healing as well, because it's a form of releasing something that you hold on to. And
Mm.
that's how I ended up writing all of those questions. And I felt, well, if this helped me, if I approach this situation like this with my dad, maybe it'll be easier, not only for me, because I probably would have got emotional or upset by doing it face to face first.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just wrote the questions in this journal. I gave it to him. So whatever emotion that he may have needed to go through on his own, and me not being around, just by reading the words that I wrote on, in the book, allow him to go through that on his
Yeah.
own,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
believe helped break the ice
Mm.
of a lot of unanswered things that he might have wondered what I was thinking
Mm.
when I didn't want to have anything to do with him.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Wow.
which ultimately I believe helped him heal, answer the questions, get a better understanding of where my mind was at and what I was going through, and ultimately brought us together to have a civil conversation and to be men about it and
Mm.
to own up to what happened.
Mm.
So,
Mm. Yeah, and so one thing that I wanted to remark on was like what you were saying about your father not being born a certain way, and circumstances and things happen. It ultimately boils down to our choices, and I think it points to the power of our choices, because a lot of times I don't. To me, it seems I am a life coach, a certified life coach, and it seems to me a lot of times we don't make the connection between our choices and the condition of our lives. A lot of the times people even like to kind of blame some things on other people, but your choice is still a factor, because you are still responsible for your choices regardless of what other people do. And so I really think it goes to show the power of our choices, and in us having the power to choose, it's actually a godlike quality. It's one of the things that makes us being created in God's image is that we do have the ability to sit back, to reason, to make choices, to decide, and actually shape our reality with our choices. And if we're not careful with our choices, or we don't understand the power of our choices, then we can end up going down paths and creating a life that we don't necessarily want, and even a destructive path that ends our lives in some situations. And kind of an example of that with your father. But I'm glad, and I was very, very happy, and I'm going to explain that in a minute, when I saw some of the answers that he wrote to your questions. And so for you all who are wondering what Mike is talking about as far as the answers, questions to the answers, or he wrote, Mike wrote some questions that he wanted to ask his dad, to kind of trying to deal with some of the things that he was going with. And he gave it to him in a book. And he basically told his dad, like, you can write your answers in this book and just give the book back to me. And I thought that was really, like everything you said about, it gave him time to process. It gave you time to process. It probably took a lot of tension out of the situation. I thought that was very, very smart, an approach to take. And I was really like, wow. I mean, I never kind of, of course I've had situations with people, and I've never kind of thought about, like, just let me write this, give this to them, and then get the answer back. It definitely gives the space and things to think about stuff. So I thought that was really, really interesting, and very, very touched by his answers. In a conversation, I think writing stuff, like you said, is releasing. It kind of gives you space to be more open. And I thought that his answers were very, very deep and very revealing and very honest and very vulnerable. And sometimes it's easy to do that stuff when you're by yourself, as opposed to talking to somebody face to face, because you have the tendency to want to be more guarded, especially if they say something and things like that. So it was very, very touching. I was almost in tears when I got to that part. I mean, there was a lot of parts where I felt kind of tearing up, but that was definitely one where I was just like, oh my goodness, wow.
Can I touch on something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Things that I've learned about men and myself, that I discovered within myself, and why we suppress so much, is how we're raised, how we're sort of groomed into not dealing with emotions, not expressing hurts or pains or things that are going on with us, because it's often kind of like said, you're a boy, toughen up, you'll be all right. But not necessarily allow us to, like, verbally say, hey, this is what's going on with me. Let me tell you, and then let's figure out a solution on how to get past this. We don't really go through that as young boys being raised up. It's usually more of a let's dissect the situation when it comes to daughters, because of the nurturing type of like situation. And I think there has to be some form of balance when it comes to us as boys being raised, and our fathers doing that with us as well, well too. And you do see mothers kind of take on that role, which they probably pick up from watching males do it to boys. But we really gotta learn to open up and talk and express ourselves when we're children, no matter if we're a boy or a girl. And I think that's key in general, because when we become men as adults, and when we get in relationships with the women that we get involved with, and we get that question, well, why don't you talk to me? Why don't you open up? It's the way we were raised, and we've been conditioned, and we make the choice to shut down, and oftentimes not open up. And it's embedded in us to behave that way. Oftentimes, it's not recognized, it's not understood by the woman we're involved with. It's not understood because maybe people didn't grow up without their parents operating with them like that. And that's why I'm able to create the book the way that I did it. That's also a solution that I discovered, not only for myself, but I felt it would be helpful for my father as well. And him not necessarily knowing my sort of strategic way of trying to figure out how we gonna fix this thing. I didn't know if it was gonna work.
Yeah,
You could
yeah,
have
I
took the
know.
book and just been like, I can't, I
Mm,
don't want to deal with it.
yeah,
But
yeah.
my father wanted a relationship,
Mm,
a better relationship with me. I would hear growing up a lot of times other people would come to me and be like, Mike, your dad talk about you all the time, and I'd be like,
mm.
I used to be like so. You know what I'm
Right,
saying? Like
right.
I don't know why he talking about me.
Mm,
He don't come get me.
mm,
He don't come try to like do nothing.
mm,
You know,
mm,
but my dad, despite what he went through, he would always brag about me,
mm,
and I would hear it from other people. You
mm,
know,
mm,
so those little moments in life, it wasn't a lot, but
mm,
I don't know if God would send these people like here and there. Just somebody that say something, I'll push it to the side. I don't want to
mm,
hear it.
mm,
But
mm.
eventually, when it came to God dissecting me and opening me up, all of those things started to come back, and I was like, you know what? My dad tried to work. He tried to like do something. So let me make this step, you know what I'm saying, and stop rejecting it and figure out if we can fix it.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's so powerful, and like even I know when you were saying you didn't know if it would work. You said in the book that you gave him the book, and you basically was like, if you don't answer these questions, then we probably not gonna have a relationship after that. And I totally can understand that because it's like it will feel like rejection and it will feel like more of the same, and like you kind of put yourself in a vulnerable state to show that you kind of needed something from him and for him to not do again what he should have been doing before. And like I knew that that was a very delicate time for you guys' relationship at that point, and I was really even in myself because I hadn't saw that he responded with his own what you put in there. I was just really hoping that not only would he respond, but that he would be really, really open in explaining what it was. Because even though, like you said, he might say, I don't want to deal with it, but he also may give very kind of, I just made bad choices and leave it at that and not really explain. But he really went into explaining. It was almost like he was waiting for the opportunity to kind of explain himself because he really went into a lot of detail to talk about why he did what he did, how he felt, and I was so touched by that because I know a lot of people struggle. I know a lot of people would pay money to get that type of answer from their fathers about a lot of different type of stuff. And so I was just really, really, really touched by that and happy that he gave you those type of answers. And I could see it being the beginning of, fixing things with you guys. But
When
something that
I
I'm
when I
sorry,
gave
what?
him the book, I didn't write these specific words, but I just said, Dad, please don't sugarcoat it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
need you to look in there and what I wrote. Don't sugarcoat it. I need the truth. And when you're done with the book, I'll come back and get it.
Yeah, that was genius. That was
Yeah.
really good. And so another thing that you talked about is like men when it comes to like emotion things like that. And again, I think this is something like what you said with women in their lives they don't really understand. Next week I have a show that I'm doing about depression, and I talk about the wiring of the brain. Like a lot of, I would say probably 90% of 99% of life, if not more, it comes a lot from how our brain is wired. And the Bible talks about be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's basically you rewiring your brain because we do stuff over and over again. Our brain is like a supercomputer. And so what we do the most is what we end up copying and mimicking and things like that. And so when you are not taught to process emotion, so boys are naturally gravitate towards logic more than emotion, in my understanding, and women kind of naturally gravitate towards emotion more than logic. But we both need to be taught how to process emotion, how to process logic. And when we don't gain those tools, which a lot of the time is what our parents teach us, men teach you how to process logic, women teach you how to process emotion, and then they both kind of learn from each other to give you the male or the female version of how to do that. If you don't learn how to do that, especially when you're a kid, you're not going to know how to do it as an adult. It's not something that you can just, pick up on like, oh, okay, I need to process emotion, boom, and you do it. you're going to struggle. And so I can totally understand, like, when it comes to men, if you're always told, especially in our culture and society, because God created men to be emotional just like women. We just express these things in different ways, but it's also always attributed like men don't have feelings, or men don't understand feelings, or men. So, but if you're not being taught to process your emotions, especially in culture, society telling you, oh, boys and men, just be tough, you don't have feelings. As an adult male, you're going to struggle with processing emotion. And a lot of the times your struggle to do that comes from either suppression, or when it does come out, it's expressed as anger. And so you definitely need another man. I think it's key for a man to teach another man how to process emotion, that you need to learn how to do that. So when these feelings come up, you know where they fit, because the problem is like, you don't know what to do with them. Like, okay, I feel this, but what does it mean? Or I feel this, but what do I do with it? Or I feel this, but I don't want to react in a certain way that's going to be destructive and things like that. So you need to understand what your feelings mean, because all feelings come from thoughts. And so you have to kind of dissect it backwards and figure out what it means, which leads me into kind of my next thing that I wanted to talk to you about, because a part of your process of healing, you talk about seeking the truth. And I think this is really, really important. I talk about this a lot in my own coaching and in my own books that I've written. I have a whole chapter about how to find healing. And a big major component is that is seeking the truth, because a lot of the times, like you said, we just dismiss stuff. We just suppress it. We just don't want to deal with things like that. And we actually have to put those things on the table and seek the truth about what is actually going on. And that process of seeking, if your heart and mind is open and with God's direction, of course, will lead you to the truth, I would say 99.9% of the time. And so I thought that you kind of expressing, okay, now I have these feelings. You recognize that there's an issue. I need to deal with them. Okay, how do I deal with them? Is that I need to find out the truth about these things. I need to find out if my father is really the man that I see him as in my mind. I have like a quote here from the book that um, I wanted to read. You said, I confront you, and you talk about talking to both of your parents. So it wasn't just your dad, which I thought was really important too. But you said, I confronted my parents, and here's what leaning not on your own understanding comes into play. Because many of you have heard the popular acronym FALSE, which is false fear, which is false evidence appearing real. And because of my fear, I made up several stories as to the reason why things happened the way they did, when I wasn't confronting the source of my pain. I created a false reality that lacked the evidence to support my thoughts. I wanted to seek the truth because it was important to know if the stories I created in my head were real. I was like, wow, that was really, really powerful. And so can you talk a little bit about that process? Because you talked about talking to your mom, and then we talked about you um, giving the questions to your dad. So can you talk a little bit more about the process of kind of seeking the truth?
Um, I think the bottom line is we need to know the truth. Um, Parents, adults, when they go through things, I think a lot of times some of them call it, I'm protecting my child. But a lot of that quote unquote protection is detriment to their children, especially when mothers and fathers have friction and they break up and they're having tension between them two. And then, the child is over here on the side. And I think it's important for, parents to be upfront and honest with like what really went on between the two. And I felt that there was a need for me not to just address my pops, but to address my mom as well. And as rough as it was to go to my mother, I had to do it because I know that they both created me. I know that they both were once in a relationship. And I know that they both had a hand in the separation, the decisions that were made. And then that me and my sister were left over here on the side, and really no explanation. And I needed answers. And for us who get raised by our moms, our moms are like everything. And it's like, I've seen so many moms, whether it's them shows that's like divorce court or paternity court, and you see how much information is withheld
Mm,
from these
mm,
from their kids. These people be like 40, 50 years old, and they're trying to figure out what's going on with the other half of them, and their moms are keeping information or not telling
mm,
the truth, because they don't want to own up to their own mess, or
mm.
they think that keeping something away is going to help the child out, when the child is all they've been saying is, I want my dad in my life. You
Mm,
know what I'm
mm,
saying?
mm.
It doesn't matter if you think, and this is how I feel, it doesn't matter if you think it's going to hurt me. I still need to
You need to
know,
know.
you
Yeah,
know.
exactly.
And I commend my mom. My mom never spoke bad about my dad in front of me
Mm,
and my sister,
mm,
despite what they went through.
mm,
She always left the door open for us to have a relationship, regardless of the alcoholism and the drugs that my pops took. She never kept him away from us. If he
mm,
called, she would allow us to talk to him if we chose to.
mm,
Of
mm,
course, you heard me. I didn't want to talk to him.
mm.
So, but I think that was another key point, that helped the journey of us fixing our relationship. And I think
Yeah.
my mom understood that. My
Mm,
mom, know my dad. She knew the man he was before he got into that stuff,
mm,
versus the dude
mm,
that he transformed into.
mm.
And that process was tough, but you got to do it if you want to
Mm,
heal. If you need that stability for yourself, you
mm,
got to address both, in my opinion.
mm,
And you got to, when you're ready, take it one day at a time. Do like I
mm,
did. Write it down first.
mm. Yeah, and so like even what you were saying when it comes to like kids, I have kind of this thing that I do with my own kids is like once they start asking, then you need to give them the answer. Like you don't need to bring things to them and overwhelm their young developing minds with stuff that they're not ready for. But once they start asking questions, that means they're at a place where they want to understand, and you have to give them the answers. Now, granted, you might not tell them the nitty gritty,
Mhm.
but they need to know what's going on, because again, we go back to our minds. The main purpose of our mind is to process information. So the more information you have, the better information you have, the more truthful information you have, the more of the chances of you making the right decisions and coming to the right conclusions because of that. And so when you lack information, or you don't, or you hold back information, it diminishes the person's ability to come up with the right conclusions or the right answers to the question, and that creates a whole nother level of turmoil on its own. And so you have to give the answers. The Bible talks about the truth setting you free. So as much as the truth might hurt, it is still much more freedom and peace that comes from that and knowing the truth than it is from not knowing. So it's really important, I think, to say the truth, and especially when kids start asking questions about, okay, why is this like this, why is this like that, you need to satisfy their mind's hunger for understanding by giving them the truth. When you don't, it creates other problems. And so that's very, very important. Just in parenting in general. I mean, we're talking about not having your fathers, but the hope is that from this conversation we have parents that are listening. They can now incorporate some of these things when it comes to their own kids, so they don't necessarily have to struggle for years and years and trying to figure stuff out. If they want to know, go ahead and tell them. And like what you talk about, people not wanting to own up to their own stuff, that kind of comes from you. Like what you said, when it comes to yourself, I've dealt with myself. When you deal with your own issue, it becomes much easier to now, express it to your, give the truth to your kid because you've dealt with it for yourself. Another thing that you pointed out, which I think is very, very, very important, is not vilifying the other parent that's not there. I feel like if kids, even if their other parent is bad, you need to let them draw that conclusion for themselves without
Mhm.
you telling them that. Because that creates a whole nother problem. I know so many men and women both who vilify the other parent. You don't understand that that other person is a part of your child. So when you vilify the other parent, you're actually hurting them in a way that you probably are not even aware of. And so it's really important that you let the child get to see the truth for themselves instead of you trying to spoon feed it to them because again, it helps them process the whole situation for themselves and walk away from it with something that can actually help them and not necessarily hinder them. You talk about in this process of confronting healing, I mean forgiveness. You talk about not even forgiving your dad, but having to forgive yourself. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's really important also.
Um, yeah, forgiving self is important. I think it's possible that many of us who grew up in single parent homes, we create these ideas in our head that are, false, evidence that appears real to us on the
Mm,
reasons why maybe our father was absent.
mm,
And you don't know as a kid that you're doing this to yourself, especially depending on how your parenting uh, is being administered to you from your parents.
mm, mm,
And when you think about all the thoughts that you create in your head, and this story that you create in your head, I've heard countless times from people who are just like me that think in their head that the reason their father is absent has something to do with them. And
mm.
oftentimes it has nothing to do with the children whatsoever.
Exactly,
It's usually
exactly.
between what's going on with the parents on why one of the parents decides to part way and go,
Mm,
where they choose to go to.
mm,
But when our parents aren't upfront with us, when our parents are not being honest about what they're doing wrong in their relationship with each other, we can't help but to formulate our
exactly,
own stories because we're not being told the truth.
exactly, exactly.
Our parents are not being honest with us.
Hmm.
And understanding that about myself, and understanding the damage that I created within my own self by developing those and creating those stories. You got to
Hmm.
forgive yourself because I wasn't parented in a way where it would have prevented me from doing that.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
the best way I can put it.
Yeah, because I know some people would look at, the situation and say, well, what do you have to forgive yourself for? You were the kid, you didn't do anything wrong and things like that. And I think like what you're saying, when you come to the understanding that some of the conclusions that you drew were wrong and that the actions that you took because of those, that's a ripe opportunity for guilt and condemnation and things like
Mhm.
that to kind of set in. Of course, the enemy will get in there and exacerbate those things, and then you can end up going in a totally different direction.
Let
And
me
so
touch
I
on this.
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, 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 go ahead.
Oftentimes, I think while we as kids we create these stories, when we hear our parents fussing about us,
Mm,
all we hear is maybe our names in the conversation.
mm,
Or we may hear our mother say something about these kids that, these kids this and that. That's
mm,
why we start making these stories up in our head and be thinking it has something to do with us on why the
mm.
parent is absent because the parents aren't being cognizant of
What they're, yeah, the
of the
impression.
information that they're
Mm,
spewing out publicly around
mm,
their children.
mm.
And then when it's not explained, we over here on the side absorbing, these conversations, which we don't hear the other side of the conversation either. And we
Exactly.
develop these stories in our head.
Mm,
And that's
mm.
that's where it comes from.
Yeah, yeah. And then your kids are always, I mean, the main thing that we do, I don't know if you hear the echo, I kind of do, hope it goes away.
No, I hear
Um,
nothing.
Okay. So everything, our parents is the source of our identity. And so whatever they do becomes a reflection on who we think we are. And so when you, like you said, you don't have the information, things like that, the question becomes, okay, how does this affect me? What does it say about me? What does it have to do with me? How is this connected to me? And again, when you don't have those answers, and I talked about information, having the right information, you are going to draw the wrong conclusions. It's almost impossible not to. There's no kid that's going to be able to sit back and say, well, this doesn't really have anything to do with me because mom and dad were just having some problems and dad kind of had bad childhood and it's still affecting him when he got older, and so now he's acting this way and mom is, I mean, they just don't have that information to understand things on a larger scale. And so it is really important that you give the answers, and to be careful with what you're saying, because like what you said, you have some people that don't necessarily talk bad about the kid to the child, but they hear the parent talking about the other parent to other people. Oh, he's just this. Oh, he's just that. And kids, again, they're sponges. They're going to absorb it, and then they're going to internalize it, because that man that you're talking about, or that woman that you're talking about, is part of their identity. So what does that have to do with who I am? So yes, very, very, very important. And I forgot what I was going to say before, but it's okay. We can move on. And so something that you didn't really get into the book, and anybody that's watching, if you guys have any questions for Mike, you can go ahead and put those in the chat, because we're going to wrap up here very soon. But one of the things that you, like you said, you don't get into the book is, how did you guys' relationship develop after that? I mean, you talk about the process of you coming to terms with it, the process of you dealing with it, healing from it, reaching out to him, and then the book kind of ends from there. But you don't really go into how did you guys' relationship transform. You have a picture in there of you kind of laughing with your dad and kind of giving him a arm hug or whatever. And so I'm curious as to, how did your relationships, how much did it heal? Like, did you guys become very, very close, or was it still some distance there, or like, how did things develop between you guys after the elephant was cleared out of the room?
So after the elephant was cleared out of the room, me and my father's relationship really took off. It's funny. My father, he has passed away. As he got older, he did get ill, and it got to a point where I was doing things where I had to take care of different things for my father.
Oh, wow.
So the only thing I would say was weird at one particular point, just telling my dad that I loved him, to say those words, because we had been so far apart for so long. But I can honestly say I used to force myself to say it because I wanted him to know. And I was genuinely doing it. I do love my dad, but I wanted him to know, as he, began to transition in his life and leaving this earth, that I wanted him to know that all the hard feelings that I ever had were gone, that I did love him, that I did forgive him, and that
Wow.
we, that our relationship was fixed. I would take my dad, grab my nephew, we go out to eat, do things, try to, if there was like something going on for Father's Day, I would go pick him up and do the stuff with him, kind of do a little bit of things that we might have not got to do when I was younger, like father-son stuff. If he was, able to do so, if his health didn't hinder him from not being able to go somewhere. So it was good. Go over his house, just hang out, chill with him. He was a Cowboys fan. I don't like the Cowboys, but we'll watch football. He loved karate movies. We'll watch, movies and stuff.
Wow.
Things that he had interest in. So from there, we just bonded from that way.
And so how many years did you guys have of that reconciled relationship before he passed? And I'm sorry to hear that he passed, by the way, because you didn't mention that in the book either. I kind of put it together that he probably did, and I think we talked outside of this. You mentioned that he did, so I'm sorry to hear that. But how much time did you guys have together?
Me and my dad fixed my relationship. I'm 42 now. I think I was around about 31 when we started to work on it. So between that and my dad's probably, it hasn't been that long since my dad passed away. This was the first Father's Day that I haven't had with him this year.
Oh, okay.
But he passed away last year.
So you guys had almost 10 years, maybe close
Yeah,
to 10 years. Okay,
yeah,
wow,
hmm
wow.
yeah,
Oh, it's I'm so happy. I mean, reconciliation is such a powerful thing. And I know so many people don't get the chance to reconcile. And I was even watching, I forgot, some documentary or reality show the other day, and this girl was looking for her dad, who she was again didn't want to have anything to do with. And she started looking for him, and then she found out that he died, and she was so upset. And she was saying, I wish I would have reached out to him before then. And she started telling people, like, don't wait, because the chance might not be there. And so
hmm
I'm really happy to hear that you guys were able to reconcile, and that you had a lot of time to kind of establish this new relationship before he passed. So that's a blessing. That's a wonderful blessing. A lot of people don't get a chance to. A lot of parents are not interested in reconciling. A lot of kids hold on to their anger, they're not able to let it go. So there's a lot of stuff going on in there that has to happen for reconciliation to take place. And I feel like it's such a blessing, and I'm happy to hear it, but I'm also sad to hear that he passed away
yeah.
also.
One
So
one of the things I wanted to do in the depictions of the book, when if for anybody that gets the book, the pictures that are in there of me and my dad, I wanted people to gather that we did fix it,
mm,
simply because of the subtitle, "A Story of Reconciliation," to show
yeah,
that there was a hard time. But through these depiction of the pictures of us laughing and having fun, or me hugging him, shows that we salvaged our relationship. And that was the goal of our book.
yeah,
When I went to my dad and said that I wanted to um, develop this book, he was all for it. I tried to, get it done in hopes that it would have been done before he had passed away. But
mm,
my goal was to for us both to become authors.
mm,
So this book, between us both, was something that we really felt would help people, as
mm.
well as a way for me to honor him and honor his name. Um, Even though he's passed away, people will still get to meet him.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I was touched by his responses. I was like, wow, wow. So, so, there's a question here that I'm going to ask you, but before I ask you that person question that they asked, I have one more question for you. If you can explain to people how you changed. So we're talking a lot about, the importance of fathers being in the home and how it affects the child, and then the issues that you deal with as you grow up. And so you recognize there was an issue and that you needed to deal with it. So how did reconciling with your father, dealing with your issue and things like that, how did that affect you as Mike?
I feel I'm a better leader now.
Mm,
I think, doing my own self work, it's changed my life tremendously.
mm,
I feel like I'm more equipped. I feel like I'm a better person to like delegate responsibility. I'm a better manager of my life. I'm able to recognize my wrongs and acknowledge them and be okay with it.
mm,
I can take
mm,
constructive criticism without a
mm,
problem.
mm.
And
Wow.
I'm happier
Mm,
these days, and it helps me to think about, I don't have children, but it helps me to think about when I do have a child, how to handle the situation, what things to do. And even if I don't know them, it's okay to ask for help.
mm.
It's okay to let my child know that, hey, pops don't know it all. This is what I know, but we can go somewhere and figure it out together and find somebody that do know. So
Right. Wow. Wow, that's beautiful. So Teresa is asking, I'll post the question here. She says, how are you relating to your spouse now? Or how has your relationship with your dad affected your marriage? I was actually thinking this too, because again, I'm a female. So I'm looking at it from the other end of, like, what issues my husband or my son might have. And a lot of times women are not really aware very much of these things and kind of react and do things towards our spouses or sons, or things that are not necessarily the best thing, just kind of out of ignorance. And so I'm wondering also, like, how does this affect your relationship with, women? If you are married, I don't think you told me that you were married. So how does this affect your relationship with your spouse, or just relationship with women in general, even if you're not married?
I'm not married yet. Stay tuned for that. I'm working on that as we speak. I like to date with the intent to marry. That's the position I'm in now. And she know who she is. But when it comes to my relationship, I think I'm real transparent and open. When it comes to like what I've been through in my life, I'm very open with letting my significant other know what I feel like I lack in, what I feel like I didn't absorb from not having a father in my life, and I think by being upfront with that has helped my relationship tremendously, because I think it would help her handle how she deals with me, because she's one who actually grew up with two parents, and her father have a great relationship. And I think it's my own healing is key, and everything that I've recognized about me. I'm open. I'm not afraid to share. What's going on with me. I'll try to explain it to the best of my ability, and I think that's helpful in relationships.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Communication is key. You have a lot of marriage coaches and counselors and things like that will tell you communication is very, very important. And so, I mean, a lot of people do things in relationships because okay, we're talking about the absence of fathers in the home, or the importance of fathers in the home. And one of the things that kind of stood out to me about your book is that these issues are not confined to absent parent. You can have abusive parent in the home, or you can have a parent in the home, but they're not emotionally available, or
Right.
um, they're gone all the time and they're never there. And so you can still develop some of these issues, and even worse issues, from having dysfunctional relationship with your parent. And so I think it's really important that people recognize that, because these things do eventually affect your relationship when you get older, with other people, with your other family members, especially with your spouse, especially with your children. And so it is important to kind of deal with these things. If you can deal with it while you're single, that's great. That's the ideal. But if you don't, you still need to deal with them at some point, because they will seep into and affect your other relationships. And like you say, even if it's not something that you're like, your parent was abusive and now you're abusing your children or your spouse or whatever, you can still just be, like you said, not at peace, restless, not as open. You have all these issues, afraid to be vulnerable and things like that, that can come from issues that you have with your parents. So I think a lot of people have mommy issues and daddy issues. I as well had to have overcome some of my own issues when it comes to that. Even though my parents were married, they divorced when I got a little bit older, but I still had some issues with that too. And so I do think it's important that you're mindful of how you're coming across to your spouse, and how you're treating your spouse, and the things that you have just accepted, that this is just who I am, when really you're kind of operating out of dysfunction because of the relationship that you have with your parents.
Let me say this.
Go ahead.
Transparency is important. Um, but I think it's also important to, while you're being transparent, you shouldn't allow it to be like this crutch that you can always lean on. And
Yes,
it doesn't give
agree.
you any excuse to do the work to not do better.
Exactly. I totally
You
agree.
got to do the
Totally agree.
work. Be
Yeah,
transparent and do the work.
exactly. I mean, this can kind of branch into so many different other conversations and topics, and we can talk for a very long time. But I do want to kind of wrap this up a little bit and kind of encourage people, anybody watching, just be mindful of yourself, your child. If you're raising a child in a home with an absent parent, and if you're a parent yourself, to be mindful of how much your child needs your influence, how much they need your love, your direction. I did post a replay show earlier this week about childhood issues and how it affects your adult relationship. So if you guys want to go back and talk about that, it'll probably go into a little bit of this stuff a little bit more. But yes, this is a really, really important topic. We all know that the single parent homes in the Black community, the rate is very, very high, and so we are sometimes unconsciously producing and reproducing broken people and broken scenarios that eventually come back and affect the home and the culture and the community. And these things need to be addressed. And God is definitely the one. They look big to us, and there's a lot of components that are involved in order to bring about that reconciliation and healing. But God is definitely the one to help us do that and get us on the other side of it. And I mean, it's just a blessing to be able to read your book. It touched me a lot, and I would definitely recommend it to anybody who is struggling with any of these issues and whichever position they are in. Marissa said, great interview, Sage. Thank you so much, Marissa. I appreciate you tuning in. Next week, I'll be doing a show about Christianity and depression, which can also come from not having your parent there. So you guys make sure you tune in for that. And before we head out, I just want you, Mike, to let people know where they can reach you, what kind of things you offer, what do you have anything special coming up? His his web address, you guys, is in the banner below if you want to go to visit his webpage. But let everybody know what you're doing, where they can find your book and things like that.
Awesome. All right. I'm on all social media platforms on Facebook, Mike Lynk. My Instagram is Mike Lynk Speaks as well. If you want to follow me on Instagram, I'm working on my YouTube. I'm developing that, so I'll hold off on giving out that information as well. Right now, I'm just continuing to push the book. I do have a workshop as well that I've been introducing to schools and churches that deals with this particular issue. It's a 9-week program that I believe is really going to impact and help change people's lives. And hopefully bring some relationships back together as well. I have that going on, and I'm just gonna keep pressing on, pushing the message, stay being a man of purpose, and from there continue to lead by example. And I just want more men to who stand in my position as well and feel the same way, that we get out here and that we be visible, that we be verbally advocates of doing this and getting fathers back in the home.
Yeah, amen. Thank you so much, Mike. Please be sure to let me know if you have anything you want, like your program. I can post it in my group, so if anybody wants access to that, all of his links. If you guys look on the promo video that I put out earlier this week about the show, all of his links should be there as well. And I thank you again, Mike, and I hope we do something again in the future. I think you have a very powerful message, a powerful book, and I know God is going to use it to bless a lot of people to find the path of reconciliation and healing that they haven't been able to find. So thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you guys, no problem.
Y'all have a good week.
Yeah, thanks, and tune in again next week. Bye.